On February 26, 2022, the United States pushed a button that had never been pushed against a superpower before. In response to the invasion of Ukraine, Washington and Brussels announced the nuclear option of finance. They cut Russia off from SWIFT. This is the messaging system that connects 11,000 banks and processes $5 trillion a day. Cutting a nation off from SWIFT is supposed to be a death sentence. It freezes trade, collapses the currency, and strangles the economy. The West celebrated. They predicted the ruble would turn to rubble, and Putin would face a revolution within months. But 2 years later, something impossible happened. Russia didn't collapse. The ruble recovered, and their economy actually grew faster than the UK or Germany. How? Because the weapon backfired. Instead of isolating Russia, the sanctions inadvertently accelerated the creation of a shadow financial system that bypasses the US dollar entirely. Here is the terrifying reality the news won't tell you. By weaponizing the dollar, the United States accidentally told every other country on Earth that their money isn't safe. And now the dominoes are falling. China, India, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia are all quietly building an escape hatch. This wasn't a tactical victory. It was a strategic suicide. History shows that every time an empire weaponizes its financial system, it loses its dominance within 30 years. Britain did it in 1914 and lost the pound by 1944. The US did it in 2022. The clock is ticking. In this video, I'm going to show you the 5-stage pattern that kills reserve currencies. I will show you the exact data proving the dollar is already dying. And I will show you why your standard of living, which depends on the world accepting American IOUs, is about to change forever. But first, you need to understand what SWIFT actually is, and why controlling it gave America a God mode cheat code for 50 years. Before we can understand how the weapon backfired, we have to understand the weapon itself. Most people hear SWIFT and assume it is a global bank that holds all the money. That is false. SWIFT, Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, doesn't hold a single penny. It doesn't transfer funds. It transfers messages. Think of it as a WhatsApp for banks. When a bank in New York wants to send $10 million to a bank in Tokyo, they don't mail a suitcase of cash. They send a secure, encrypted message via SWIFT that says, "We authorize this transfer." The actual money moves through a separate system of correspondent banks, but SWIFT is the nervous system that tells the money where to go. Created in 1973 by a consortium of 239 banks to replace the slow and clunky telex system, SWIFT was designed to be the ultimate neutral utility. It is headquartered in Belgium, specifically to keep it out of American or Soviet control during the Cold War. It processes over 11 billion messages a year, about 45 million every single day. It is the plumbing of the global economy. If you cut a country off from SWIFT, their banks ostensibly go blind. They can't communicate. They can't process trade finance for oil shipments. They can't settle cross-border debts. They are trapped on an economic island. But here's the catch. The glitch that gives the United States God mode over a supposedly neutral Belgian system. While SWIFT is in Europe, the vast majority of international trade is settled in US dollars. And every single US dollar transaction, no matter where it happens on Earth, must eventually clear through a correspondent bank in New York City. This gives the US Treasury legal jurisdiction over the entire chain. The United States can effectively walk into SWIFT's headquarters and say, "If you don't ban this country, we will ban you from the US financial system." Since no bank can survive without access to dollars, SWIFT complies. We saw a preview of this in 2012 when the US forced SWIFT to disconnect Iranian banks. It devastated Iran's economy, collapsing their oil exports and spiking inflation to 45%. The weapon worked, but using it against a small rogue state is one thing. Using it against a nuclear superpower is another. This is the kind of mechanism that the elites rely on you not understanding. They want you to think it's just sanctions, not a manipulation of the plumbing itself. We are building a community here that sees through these technical lies. We are racing to hit 1,000 subscribers by December 31st, 2025. If we hit that number, I am going to release the killer video, a script I have explicitly written to expose the darker, domestic version of these control mechanisms. I am waiting to upload it until we have a stronghold of insiders. So if you want to see how the machine really works, hit that subscribe button right now. Now, let's look at the 4 times in history this weapon was used, and why it always results in the death of the empire that uses it. History is screaming a warning at us, but Washington isn't listening. The pattern of financial suicide has played out twice before with devastating clarity. The first example is the British Empire. Before 1914, the British pound was the undisputed king of global finance. The City of London was the safe haven for the world's wealth. But when World War I began, Britain panicked. They passed the Trading with the Enemy Act, which allowed them to seize the private assets of German citizens and companies held in British banks. This was a violation of the unwritten rule of banking. Even in war, money was supposed to be neutral. By seizing those assets, Britain won a short-term tactical victory, but they suffered a long-term strategic defeat.
Thank you very much.
Neutral countries looked at London and realized, if they can seize German money today, they can seize my money tomorrow. Capital began to flee London and move to a neutral, rising power, New York City. By weaponizing the pound, Britain forced the world to build up the US dollar. It took exactly 30 years, from 1914 to 1944, for the dollar to officially replace the pound as the world reserve currency. The weaponization started the clock on their own demise. We saw the exact same pattern repeat in 1979 with Iran. When Iranian revolutionaries took American hostages, President Jimmy Carter froze $12 billion in Iranian assets sitting in US banks. It was the largest asset freeze in history at the time. Tactically, it worked. It put massive pressure on Iran. But strategically, it sent a shockwave through the Middle East. The Saudi royals, the Kuwaiti emirs, and the OPEC nations, all US allies, suddenly realized that their sovereign wealth wasn't actually sovereign. It was rented. It existed at the mercy of an American president's signature. This was the moment the seeds of diversification were planted. OPEC nations began quietly moving reserves into gold, marks, and yen, and opening accounts in Zurich and Singapore. In both cases, the dominant power thought they were flexing their muscles. In reality, they were creating an immune response in the global system. They taught their enemies, and their friends, that they could not be trusted. But in 1914 and 1979, the targets were relatively small, or the alternatives were limited. In 2022, the United States made the fatal mistake of attacking a target that was too big to isolate and too resource-rich to ignore. They attacked Russia, expecting a quick collapse. But instead, they proved that you can survive without the dollar. In 2014, when the US sanctioned Russia over Crimea, it was a warning shot. The sanctions were light, but the message was clear. This was the biggest strategic mistake the US ever made, because it gave Vladimir Putin 8 years to prepare for the real war. From 2014 to 2022, Russia systematically de-dollarized. They dumped $130 billion in US treasuries. They bought 1,300 tons of gold. They built their own domestic payment system, SPFS, to mirror SWIFT. Putin explicitly told the world that the dollar was a weapon and that Russia needed a shield. Western analysts laughed. They said Russia was too integrated to decouple. They were wrong. When the nuclear option hit in February 2022, when SWIFT was cut and $300 billion in reserves were frozen, the impact was immediate and brutal. The ruble crashed 30% in 48 hours. ATMs ran dry. The Russian stock market closed to prevent a total wipeout. For a week, it looked like the weapon had worked. But then the countermeasures kicked in. The Russian central bank hiked interest rates to 20% to stop the bleeding. They demanded that Europe pay for natural gas in rubles, forcing an artificial demand for their currency. And critically, they redirected their oil trade to the east. Instead of selling to Europe in dollars, they sold to India in rupees and China in yuan. By late 2022, the ruble had not only recovered, it was one of the strongest currencies in the world against the dollar. The Russian economy stabilized and actually grew faster than Germany's in 2023. This was the emperor has no clothes moment. The US fired its biggest gun, and the target didn't die. Russia proved that a major economy could be cut off from the Western financial system and survive. And that demonstration effect terrified Washington, because every other country watching, China, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, realized that if Russia could do it, they could do it too. The fear of US sanctions evaporated, replaced by a rush to build the alternative. The most dangerous consequence of weaponizing SWIFT wasn't Russia's survival. It was the great hedging that followed. Every central bank governor in the global south looked at the frozen Russian reserves and asked themselves one question. If the US gets angry at me tomorrow, over trade, over Taiwan, over climate policy, is my money safe? The answer was obviously no. So they started moving their money. This triggered stage 4 of the backfire pattern, neutral countries hedge. China, seeing the writing on the wall, accelerated its own de-dollarization. They reduced their holdings of US Treasury bonds from $1.3 trillion in 2013 to just $775 billion today. Where is that money going? It's going into gold. In 2022, central banks bought over 1,100 tons of gold, the highest amount in 50 years. In 2023, they bought another 1,000 tons. Who is buying? China, India, Turkey, Poland, Singapore. They are trading paper promises that can be sanctioned for hard assets that cannot be frozen. But it's not just gold. The payment infrastructure itself is changing. China's version of SWIFT, called CIPS, a cross-border interbank payment system, has exploded in volume. In 2020, it processed $12 trillion. By 2023, it was processing over $27 trillion. It connects 1,400 banks in 110 countries. This is a direct, operational alternative to the US dollar system. Even America's oldest allies are breaking ranks. In 2023, Saudi Arabia, the country that anchored the petrodollar system for 50 years, announced it would accept Chinese yuan for oil sales. France completed a massive LNG gas trade with China settled in yuan. Brazil and Argentina began discussing a common currency to bypass the dollar in trade. This is the death by 1,000 cuts. The dollar isn't going to vanish overnight, but its monopoly is being dismantled brick by brick. The SWIFT weapon accelerated this process by a decade. Washington traded a short-term tactical hit on Russia for a long-term strategic loss of trust. This forces us to ask the ultimate question about the future of your money. The mainstream media says the dollar is invincible. The data says it's bleeding. So I want to know what you think. Is the US dollar truly dying, or will it remain king forever? Go to the comments and type just one word: dying or king. I'm curious if you trust the charts or the news anchors. Because while the debate rages in the West, the East has already declared the winner. So, when the dust settles from this financial war, who is left standing? The biggest winner is undoubtedly China. Beijing has been playing the long game for decades, waiting for the US to make a fatal mistake. By weaponizing SWIFT, Washington effectively forced the rest of the world into China's arms. The Chinese yuan is now the de facto trade currency for the axis of resistance. China's cross-border interbank payment system, CIPS, has seen exponential growth, doubling its transaction volume in just 3 years. They didn't have to defeat the US military. They just had to wait for the US Treasury to destroy its own customer base. They are building a commodity-backed fortress where they trade real goods for real resources, cutting out the American middleman entirely. The second winner is Russia. Strategically, they have pulled off the impossible. They proved that a G20 nation can be completely severed from the Western financial system and not only survive, but grow. This victory shattered the myth of American financial omnipotence. Russia is no longer isolated. It is the anchor of a new alternative economic bloc that stretches from Moscow to Tehran to Beijing. And the losers? The biggest loser is the United States government. The dollar's exorbitant privilege, the ability to print unlimited money to fund military bases and budget deficits, depends entirely on global demand for the dollar. As that demand shrinks, the US will lose the ability to export its inflation. But the real victim isn't the government, it is you. The American consumer has enjoyed cheap imports, cheap oil, and low interest rates for 50 years because the world subsidized our standard of living. As the dollar loses its reserve status, those subsidies end. The cost of everything, from your iPhone to your gas to your mortgage, will permanently rise as the dollar loses its purchasing power abroad. We are moving from a world where America is the king to a world where America is just another country. And the scary part is, most Americans aren't prepared for the pay cut. This brings us to the final calculation. How long do we actually have before the music stops completely? The historical timeline suggests the window is closing faster than anyone in Washington wants to admit. So, how much time do we actually have left? If we use history as our guide, the timeline is terrifyingly precise. When Britain weaponized the pound in 1914, it started a clock. It took exactly 30 years, from 1914 to 1944, for the pound to lose its status as the world reserve currency. The United States started that same clock on February 26, 2022. But we don't have 30 years. Technology accelerates everything. In 1914, building an alternative payment system meant laying physical telegraph cables and shipping gold on boats. Today, China can scale its CIPS system with a software update. The network effects of the digital age mean that the decline will happen exponentially, not linearly. My estimate, based on the acceleration of the BRICS alliance and the gold buying spree, is that the US has about 15 to 20 years from the trigger event. That puts the potential end of dollar hegemony somewhere between 2037 and 2042. That sounds far away, but the effects will be felt much sooner. As the dollar's share of global reserves drops below 50%, likely by 2030, the US government will lose the ability to borrow cheaply. Interest rates will stay permanently high. Inflation will become sticky. The free lunch of the American empire is officially over. The swift weapon worked once, but it destroyed the gun in the process. This brings us back to our mission. We are tracking this decline in real time. We are building the only community that is actually preparing for the post-dollar world. And we have a goal. We are racing to hit 1,000 subscribers by December 31st, 2025. If we hit that number, I am going to release the killer video. This is the script I have already written that exposes the domestic mechanism the elites use to rig the stock market against you. I am genuinely afraid to upload it because it attacks the people who own the platforms. But if we hit 1,000 insiders, I will take the risk. Before I let you go, I want to talk to you directly for a second. Just you and me. No charts, no geopolitics. I know this is a heavy video. Realizing that your country has accidentally committed financial suicide and that your standard of living is likely to go down over the next decade is a hard pill to swallow. It creates anxiety. It makes you feel helpless, like you are strapped into a car that is driving off a cliff and you can't reach the steering wheel. I feel it too. Every time I see the debt clock tick up or see another country join BRICS, I feel that knot in my stomach. But I want you to reframe that fear. The fact that you watched this video to the very end proves something important about you. It proves you aren't one of the sheep. Most people are sleepwalking. They are watching TikTok dances while the financial order collapses. But you are here. You are looking the tiger in the eye. That means you have the survival instinct. The people who get crushed in these transitions are the ones who pretend nothing is changing. The people who thrive are the ones who accept reality and adapt. You are already ahead of 99% of the population just by knowing what SWIFT is. You are the smart money now. And you don't have to face this alone. I'm going to be here every week, watching the signals, tracking the yuan, tracking the gold, and telling you exactly what it means for your wallet. We are going to navigate this transition together. And that brings me back to that killer video. I'm serious about that. The script is sitting on my hard drive. It exposes things about the domestic market that make these international sanctions look like child's play. I want to give it to you, but we need to build this stronghold first. So, if you trust me to lead you through the storm, help me hit that 1,000 subscriber goal. Not for the algorithm, but so we can build a community that the elites can't ignore. We are going to make it through the next 20 years. And we aren't just going to survive the shift, we are going to profit from it. So, you have a choice. You can go back to believing the mainstream news that says everything is fine. Or, you can click that subscribe button, join the insiders, and get ready for the new world order. The dollar is fading. Make sure you don't fade with it. Class dismissed.